we'll get started.
Yeah,
Thank you for everyone for joining us today. I want to introduce our guest speaker, Suzie Durigon. She's the personality behind the blog Just Crumbs, and also the writer behind the beautiful book Baked. For any for any bakers out there, this is a must-have cookbook for any bakers out there. Not only are the recipes gorgeous, but they're approachable. I noticed that most of your recipes have like 10 ingredients or less.
Yes.
Which is great for someone like me. When I look at a recipe, if it looks like a Costco receipt, my eyes just glaze over, and it's just like no.
I know. I think I even wrote it in the introduction that I said what my goal for writing a cookbook was that nowhere in any ingredients was I going to ask you for like the tears of a virgin mermaid or something, like something that you'd be like, where do I get that? You know?
Exactly. Well, it's like, as much as I love the LCBO Food and Wine magazine, their ingredients, their recipe is just like, it's like super long and like crazy, some of the ingredients, or even like I'm a fan of Christina Tosi as well. I bought her book, and the ingredients is so unrealistic. A lot of them are commercial ingredients, and
they are, and it's so funny because I don't know, but I went to New York and I went there specifically to go get like all the things right at her bakery, and so of course I left with the cookbook, and I remember going home and I was like so excited to make the 10 things that I ordered and ate on the spot there. And I got home and I'm like, what is that? Like, what is that? And actually in the cookbook, I have, I called it Everything But the Kitchen Sink Cookies. And it's kind of a take on one of her cookies, because when I looked at it was so good when I got it. And then I came home and I'm like, it asked for like, one of the ingredients was like, it was like a kind of a graham cracker, but you had to make the graham crackers, and then you had to caramelize the graham crackers, and then you had to crush the graham crackers to put in the dough recipe of the chocolate chip cookies. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a baker and I'm not going to do that. So chances are nobody's going to do that, right?
Yeah. Or I remember one of the ingredients was like freeze-dried corn powder or something like that. I'm
like, where do you get that? Yeah. Again, Tears of a Virgin Mermaid, not going there. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'll tell you, let's start off for, those of us in the community who don't already know you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started blogging?
Sure. So I'm a certified chef. I went to culinary school. I've never owned a restaurant because that's the first thing people ask me. I have 3 now adult children, but when they were younger, they were all competitive athletes, and my husband has his own company, and I thought I had to make a decision. So there's not a chance I could have had a restaurant. So I opened a small catering company, which I could kind of finagle in between all of those things. And then in 2012, I think I started my own blog, and really just for, my kids were going to university, and I kind of wanted a place because I've got like 27 binders of all my recipes and my grandmother's recipes. And I thought like I need to put it somewhere so my kids can kind of have access to it. And then that's kind of where the blogging world started. At the beginning, there weren't really that many bloggers, and it was just people kind of putting it out there, and nobody really cared about things like SEO and ad revenue and all that kind of stuff. So, and it's funny because the good old days, I'm telling you, because you could write what you wanted to an audience that wanted to listen to you, right? Yeah, I know. And it's kind of, I mean, I get it because everybody wants to monetize everything, which even me, I'm having a harder time with it, which we can talk about later. But it was just kind of a nice space, and people would come and they'd read, and you could tell stories, and then it just changed. But so I started doing that, and then I'm 57. So when I went to school, I always wanted to write a cookbook. It was just kind of a bucket list thing. And when, I want to say in 2014, I started something called Bake It Forward Fridays. Mm-hmm. So on Fridays, I'd have a list in the back of my little calendar, and it was always a list of people that like either had gone through some hardship, or they did something amazing, or they just like did something nice for me. And so every Friday I would bake something for them, and then I would deliver it to them. And sometimes I'd blog about it, like without being too personal. And then when I was thinking about writing a cookbook, I was like, oh my goodness, like this is amazing. I'm going to write a cookbook about baking it forward. And which is why it's a book about baking, because I had kind of created the entire book because, I mean, I don't know how many people that are watching now watched Marty, when you interviewed Marty, talk about when you go through the whole process of publishing or trying to get a publisher to publish your book. I was like, you know, there's so many people that write cookbooks, and by the time I decided to write a cookbook, every cookbook had been written. And I'm like, and I'm not a celeb, I'm not Kim Kardashian, and I don't have good cleavage. So how am I going to sell a book? I don't know, you know, like it's, yeah, I'm old or whatever. So I thought, like, this is amazing. I'm going to write a book about baking it forward. And so I decided that it was going to be a cookbook that was sort of like an amalgam between like Ina Gartner and the, what's that book about the thing about New York, where it's like stories about New York City. Now it's escaping my mind, but it was going to be like a book that was like a cookbook that was peppered with stories, or the other way around, where stories peppered with recipes. And because over the years I had learned a lot about people, like as I was delivering all these things. And I'd also, like, sometimes if I had meetings downtown, if I had time, I'd kind of prep like 10 packages or so, and I'd leave an hour early and I'd sort of drop it off to some people that were homeless or on the streets or whatever. And then a lot of times I'd start talking to them. And what I learned was that a lot of those people, they're hungry, but they're more lonely than they are hungry. And they just kind of wanted people to talk to them. And so anyways, I had sort of acquired a lot of stories, and that's why I thought, like, this is going to be amazing. And I went to Random House because they are the publishers that everybody wants to, especially Appetite, when you're writing a cookbook. And I was for sure, like, I thought for sure they're going to be like, this is a great idea. And I got a big fat no. And I was like,
yeah, that's so surprising, because as you're telling me that, like, I thought, like, it sounds wonderful, like baking forward with, you know, like down to earth stories of, you know, people that you meet on the streets, right? Because all those people, even though on the streets, they came from somewhere. They have a story, right?
Right.
It's not something that, like, to me, that has been done before. So I'm as surprised as you are, but you handled it well and you kept going. So tell me about that.
Well, so I think, and the thing too is, I have a few friends who have written non-food books, like fiction books. And, you know, the thing when you're trying to get a book published, regardless of what kind of book it is, you can't just go to one publisher, because the reality is you're probably going to get a no. So you should have like a lineup of people. And I did, like, to be fair, I think I went to 5 different publishers, but the other publishers were smaller publishers. And, you know, so in the end, I think when I got the first no from Random House, and they were the ones I really wanted to publish, and I love them. They're amazing. They create great books. But I think what I've learned through the process is that people write cookbooks. People buy cookbooks now the way we used to buy magazines. So before, you would like go to the store and buy a cookbook because, oh, I need a book about baking, so I'm going to go to Chapters and I'm going to get this book about baking because it's like the best baking book. And now it's like, like I have 300 cookbooks, and that's because I've collected cookbooks my whole life. But a lot of people have a lot of cookbooks, and I feel like people just collect cookbooks the way you would buy a magazine, where it's not like you buy them, you put them on your shelf, you look at them, but then you don't really look at them again. And, you know, it's just sort of, so I think the whole landscape of cookbooks has changed. And that's why there are things like, you know, like a cookbook on 73 ways to make potatoes on a keto diet. I don't know, like something crazy. And I'm like, what? Somebody's going to buy that? But people will buy it because it's trendy and it's, you know, on point and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of wanted to write a book that was a little bit evergreen, that would kind of go, you know, like, you know, that 20 years from now, people could still pick it off their shelf and cook it, which I'm not going to say that that's really going to necessarily be the case with a keto cookbook or something. I mean, maybe not. But when I decided to stop feeling sorry for myself and pull back and say, I'm going to write this book, I decided to sort of surround myself with really awesome people, and people that, like, I'm a teacher. I am a culinary instructor. I've been a culinary instructor for like 25 years, but I'm actually more, I'm a perpetual student. I feel like I'm always learning, to a fault, where I'm like, well, let me just like do a little bit more research, and let me just, you know, I'm not that person that jumps right in. Like, I have to really kind of research the whole thing. So the first person that I spoke to was Fina Scropo, and she is, I don't know if you guys know her. She's incredible. She's actually now a really good friend of mine. She is an editor by trade. She's a cookbook author. She wrote The Healthy Italian, I think like 8 years ago or something. And she was wonderful. Like she was so good because, and so I'm trying to think about how I should speak to you or whoever's listening, because I'm going to speak to you or your audience sort of in a way that if anybody out there wants to write a cookbook, it's kind of how I did it. So, I mean, and it sort of worked for me. So, like I had a photographer, I had an editor, I had a designer, I had a proofreader. So I had a few people that I kind of learned through Fina, that those are the people that I kind of need. But Fina was my go-to. So like that would be my first thing, is find somebody you trust that kind of understands what you really want in the project. And so when I sat down with her,
a mentor, right?
Pardon me?
Kind of like a mentor.
Right. Well, because she had done it, right? So which was amazing because she had self-published her book. So it was amazing for me because she had kind of gone through the similar steps. It was at a different time, which made this project completely different. But like honestly, and I tell her this every time I see her, like I kiss the ground she walks on. I could not have done it without her. And I'm going to be like, I have yet to find a spelling mistake in this book. She's like unbelievable. So if anybody wants to write a book, call her because she's amazing. But we sat down and she said, okay, Suzie, so what do you want to write? And I said, I'm having a problem because I wanted to write this book. And for any of you out there that don't know me, I think I'm hilarious. Some people don't think, like my kids don't think I'm funny, but
you are hilarious. Yeah, when I was going through your cookbook and even just reading through your blog, like your personality definitely shines through.
Oh,
thanks. Just like the little comments, like about one of the ladies that you taught in your class, asking about, when it comes to separating the eggs, how far apart should you separate it?
Yeah.
Chuckle.
Yeah.
Even the part when you're talking about when you took time off to raise your kids, and that's when you started drinking, and it was like crossed off. I could
you get it, right?
I think you're funny.
Thanks. So I think it was, I mean, even on my blog, I have about probably 5 blog posts that are quite serious. And one of them was like right after COVID that I asked, will people keep baking? Because baking became like a refuge for a lot of people that didn't have anything to do. And so I get serious when I talk about gratitude and things. But when I talked to Fina, I said, I'm having a problem because I'm telling people now that I'm going to start writing this book, and everyone's saying to me like, oh my God, I can't wait. It's going to be so funny. And I'm like, not really. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And so she said to me, and this was the best piece of advice. She said to me, when you write a book, and whatever the book is, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, she said, you always assume you're going to write another one. So she said, well, how I see this, she goes, since you have all the recipes done already, she said, I see this as like Just Crumbs baked. And then the next book might be Just Crumbs holidays, or Just Crumbs gardening, or something like that. So she said, you have sort of a starting point to move forward from, which made sense. And then she said, and what we can do is, she said, we can add the Bake It Forward project to the back of the book, which I have a whole part in the back talking about Bake It Forward and what it means. And she said, and then you can add your humor into the front. So before every recipe, and it was so funny because like I tried to put a joke in like the introduction of every recipe, and like I'd type the joke and I'd send it to her, and she's like, I don't get that. And I'm like, no, it's hilarious. And she's like, no, it's not funny, Suzie. And then I'd send her something else, and she's like, that's not funny enough. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she's like, this is hilarious. I'm like, really? I don't think that's funny at all. So it's funny. It's good to have somebody to kind of, go off on. So she was amazing. When I decided to write the book, I had just met Betty. I don't know if you guys know Betty. Betty Binon is the face behind Stems and Forks. Like seriously, one of the most talented people I know. And I had met her at an event, and I was helping her with a few things. And she said, oh, I don't know how I can help you. How could I ever pay you back? And I said, what you could do? You could look at my pictures and tell me if they're good. Because I had taken pictures of every recipe. So I had done like 120 recipes. I had taken pictures of every recipe. And then she sat me down and she goes, you're not going to want to hear this, but they're a little bit blurry. And I'm like, what? And she goes, like you won't be able to see it. But she said, because you're not a photographer, but like in print, she said, you might be disappointed because they might come out just a tad blurry and they have to be really crisp. And so she goes, the only option if you want to do this is let's just start all over again. And so Betty was my photographer. She took all my pictures. So literally, like, I was just baking, like I'd bake like 6 things, I'd bring them to her house, or I'd bake 10 things and she'd come to my house. Took a while, but she was amazing. And she'd style things a certain way. And so she was great. She was amazing. And she said to me, she'll never do another cookbook again because it's just not what she does. Right. It's not like, because people have asked her since they found out that she did mine, people have asked her. I mean, if somebody wants to ask her, they can. I don't know if she's changed her mind since then, but I don't think it's what she loves to do. Yeah. But, yeah, like she was just really, she's very, I would say if you have a photographer, if you hire a photographer, a lot of people take their own pictures. And I know some people that have published cookbooks with iPhone pictures.
I've heard about those people.
Yeah. And so, I mean, when I was taking pictures, I bought the camera and I bought the things and I saved them in raw images, and then you have to get Lightroom and you have to, there's just so much to learn, right? And it's really overwhelming. So, I mean, if you could take some of that off your plate. And then Fina introduced me to her designer that did her book, Page Wave Graphics. They were amazing, 2 gentlemen. And then I hired a proofreader, which is important because she said sometimes your eye doesn't catch, like, even though I've been doing it and she's been doing it, she said we kind of need a third party to just kind of go through it all. And she did catch a couple things, so that was good. And self-publishing, you know, it was really hard. It was really hard, but it was so amazing. Like, if that makes any sense, I learned so much. I'm not going to lie. Every time somebody else gets a book deal, I'm immediately really happy for them. And then I'm like, oh, I wonder why they didn't like me. So that's just me, but that's who I am. I'm always like, oh, maybe they didn't like me. But so there's always that little thing, right? Like, if you're a normal human being, you're always going to ask yourself, like, oh, I wonder what I did wrong that made them pick that person and not me. But in the end, I mean, I learned everything there was about writing a book. And like, if you say, if I had gotten it published with a publisher, or if I'd done it the way I did it, the back work to creating the cookbook is the same. I mean, obviously you have to test the recipes, you have to do the pictures and stuff. And then once it's done, it just gets passed over. So they have a huge marketing team behind them. They'll get you on television. They'll get articles written about you. They'll get you in chapters. They'll get you in all these places. And I know when Marty spoke, because I was listening to that, Marty, it was unique because she had one published from Random House, and then she did the second one on her own. And I don't know, Lily, was it like the second one is a bit smaller? Is it a bit of a smaller book?
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen her second one. Yeah. So I think the same thing, like she, like, pardon me?
It's about a quarter of a size of a standard cookbook.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Her idea was to come out like, so she bought out one like kind of in pieces. So first it would be like the snack book, and then it'll be the lunch, and then it'll be the dinner. So it'll be like, you know, a sequence of 4 books together, right?
Together, right. Gotcha. Okay, yeah. I thought that's what I understood. But I mean, going through the whole process of doing it by yourself, I mean, really, when you have a publisher, you hand off this whole thing, and then it magically comes to you in this book form, and you're like, yay, I did it. But like with us, it was like, oh my God, now what do I? And it's funny because I talked to, I don't know if you know Diala's Kitchen. She had a book published called Diala's Kitchen by Random House, and she's lovely. And I remember when she finished writing hers, she was like, oh my God, thank God the hard part's over. And I'm like, oh wait, you thought writing the book was hard? Because no, that's not the hard part. Like, because all this other stuff, then all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, now I need to figure out how to sell the book. Now I have 5,000 books in the back of my husband's office. And he was like, excuse me, are we going to do something with these books? And I'm like, yeah.
That's exactly it. And I think a lot of people forget about that, right? They, you know, go through the process, and now, they have this beautiful book in their hand, and it's like, crap, now what?
Right. Yeah. And that is the hard process.
Yeah,
right.
I think that's probably the harder part.
It is.
The marketing aspect of it.
Right. And I think the thing with having a publisher, also the harder part too, is that all my costs were upfront. So when you publish a book with a publisher, you get an advance. So that advance should pay for all the things that I paid for upfront, like the editor, the designer, the photographer, like all those things you have to pay for. And that's what an advance is, because I would think most people, you know, I actually, got a loan from my husband, and then I paid him back when I did all. But I actually was really proud of myself because I thought I broke even before 8 months. So, and everyone said to me, like, that's amazing. So the nice thing is it's a huge chunk up front. And like for anybody out there, because I'm sure you've heard this a gazillion times, if you're thinking of writing a cookbook, you will not get rich writing a cookbook. I mean, unless you're Ina Gartner or Martha Stewart, then you will get rich. But if you're just like me, you're not going to get rich. And it's kind of I always say to people, it's like the most expensive business card I've ever had. So, you know, it's sort of a thing. It's like a legacy. I have something to pass on to my children. But the whole thing of like, you know, trying to figure out now, what do I do? Like, I have to make this money back. I need to at least break even. And for anybody out there that doesn't know, chapters, where let's say I get a book published by a publisher, it just goes to chapters. It goes to the place in England, I forget what that's called. Then the places in Barnes and Noble in the United States. None of those people will talk to you, even chapters here. If I want my book in chapters, then I have to go to each individual store. So where when you get a book published, it just goes to all the chapters. Yeah. So I literally had to go. And what happens, even Fina told me, she said, the other problem with chapters and Costco is you ship the books there, and Costco's more, it's harder than chapters, where you could ship a skid of books. And if in 2 weeks it doesn't sell, they ship the whole skid back to you. And any like cost that's incurred during all that stuff is on you. So it has to be like, you have to be pretty sure that it's going to do well. And then in chapters, it's like, you know, I talked to a few people, but I just kind of had to figure out, was it worth my while to have to do that? How was it going to benefit me where I would have control over it? So I really didn't want to do Amazon, but in the end, it actually ended up being great for me because my book wasn't in chapters or any place that people in Ontario could just go into a store and grab it. I had to have a place where they could get it. And if you have Amazon Prime, there's no shipping. I have my own website. I have a Shopify site on my site. And the reason I did that was because some people would message me and they'd say like, Suzie, like it's a book for my mom. And like, you know, and I always like, I'll wrap it and I'll put like a little thing in it and I always sign it. And some people like want a specific message. So, I mean, if it's at Amazon, it's at Amazon. Like if nothing happens, I can't go to Amazon and do that. So some people will pay, they know they have to pay the shipping, but it's the same price. It's just, and that's not me. It's just Canada Post. And so it was good that I had that so that if people wanted that, then they could kind of do that. And then I did a few pop-up shops at Christmas and things like that. But what I ended up doing was I ended up going to like just a bunch of little stores, some downtown, some up here. I live just north of the city. And they're amazing because now what I do is like, if it's Valentine's Day, then I'll go there, I'll take 5 of the books back and I'll give them 5 books that have hearts on them, or Mother's Day or whatever. And they love it. And it's so easy to sell that they're constantly calling me and saying, Suzie, I ran out of books, bring me more books. So, I mean, so in the end, more work, 100%, but kind of like you feel more proud of it a little bit that way. Cause you know, you kind of learn all the backside of it also.
Yeah, good. And then, you have more control. Right. Like where and who, you know, sells your book. And then, you can have the personal touch, which is nice.
Right.
So I bought the book from Amazon because I have Amazon Prime.
Right.
So does the majority of your sales come from Amazon or kind of privately?
Actually, most of them come from my site, believe it or not. Yeah, which was really funny because I wouldn't have thought that people would have done that. But also people that live close to me, like they'll say like, okay, just stop by your house. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Like that's totally fine. But I feel like there's, like I feel like I think I printed 5,000 books and I think I've sold 3,000 so far. So
that's incredible. That's a lot of books considering you are the whole marketing team.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I just want to address one of the comments you made about how, whenever you hear someone else getting, a cookbook deal, you kind of feel like, oh, they didn't like me. But like, from what I've heard, I honestly tell you, like those publishing companies, they get bombarded with proposals.
Oh, they do.
For them, it's nothing personal. It's just they have so many options and they can only publish so many books, right? Like, you know, it's like having one job position opening and getting 10,000 applications, right? So
100%. And sometimes, like a lot of things, like anybody who's listening, like going viral on TikTok, it's kind of the same thing. I keep saying that, like, it literally has nothing to do with anything except you might have what they want the day they get your proposal, and they'll be like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I happened to give them a proposal, and Zoe, who was amazing because I had met her somewhere else, she messaged me back and she said, Suzie, I'm really sorry. She goes, but like, we have about 6 books coming up the pipe that are all baking books. So it just, it sucked that it was bad timing, right? It was like bad timing. So, you know, it is what it is, but yeah, so it's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so let's recap, because I mean, there's so much to it, right? There's so much that you did on your own, which is incredible. But let's break it down to the main components of self-publishing. So there's the recipe, you know, itself, which is all on you because you're the writer.
Yes.
And then you have the photographer.
Yep. Editor.
Editor, proofreader, and then the graphic designer, right? So like kind of 5 main components.
Right. Yeah. So and you know, like the designers were amazing, and it's good to work with somebody that kind of understands what your look is like, because then, like, I would say like, oh, I kind of have this, I want it to look sort of like rustic, and they would say like, oh, let's put a squiggly line here, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's perfect. So like, that's kind of important to work with somebody who kind of understands your vision a little bit. But they were the ones I would say that I worked with, the proofreader and the designer I worked with the least. And then Betty, I worked with like in concentration. And then when she was done, she was done. And I would say Fina, the editor, is the one that you work with the most, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So now you got lucky, you found Fina, who was, you know, fabulous. So, you know, someone like myself, where do I start to find someone like Fina or a mentor?
You know what? I would say, like, it's like anybody else. And I don't know, Lily, if you've ever heard this. I went to this women's conference once, and there was one of the speakers was, oh my goodness, she's a CEO of, not Home Depot. Oh my goodness, she's blonde. Anyways, she's like a very prominent woman in the business world. And she said, you know, I'm a mentor to a lot of people. And she said, and so someone in the audience said like, well, how do we get a mentor? And she goes, just ask. And they were like, what? She goes, like, people think like, well, I can't ask her. And she said, people ask me. And I'm like, yeah, if I have time, I'll mentor you. So I think what I would say to most people is, if you're writing a book or thinking of writing a book, then you know what, like, and this is what I do a lot of times with people that I need information from. And I always say, like, I don't want to be a pain, but I'd love to take you out to lunch or for a coffee, and let me buy you something. And if I could, if you have like 20 minutes for me just to pick your brain, and be prepared, don't waste their time. Don't be their best friend and call them like, you know, like when you're done, you're done. Like, if some people have done that with me, where they've said like, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, you know what, let's spend like an hour together and I'll do that. So you can reach out to people that have done what you want to do, and they'll walk you through it. They'll give you some ideas. They'll give you some contacts. You know, like, I didn't know who to call to, like, for television spots, and somebody I called gave me this whole list of people and like all the people to call at this station and that station. And I'm like, so sometimes you just got to ask, and you think you can't, but you totally can.
Yeah, people are, surprisingly a lot more helpful than you would think they would.
100%. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to circle back on the sales and marketing aspect of it, because I think that's one of the most challenging parts of you know, becoming a writer. So what's your advice on that? Like, how do you start selling a book? Where do you begin?
So I think if I was to do it again, so, which is kind of how I always think, like, knowing what I know now, it's so overwhelming. And I think if you're thinking of writing a book, then I would say, before you even start writing the book, then like, know what all the outside stuff is. Like, know how the marketing world works. Know how, because I have to be honest, I stupidly did an Amazon thing, not realizing until like 4 months in that I was on Amazon.ca. I wasn't on Amazon.com. So people in the States have to purchase it through me, they can't go to Amazon.ca. So I was supposed to open an account on Amazon.com, which was a whole nother animal. And then I had to figure out where to ship it. Do I ship it to New York or Philadelphia? Because it's like Amazon Central, and where does it go? And so I was kind of late to the game, which kind of sucked that I kind of missed that whole market. And I guess I could do it now. But the other thing too about cookbooks is my cookbook is now 2 years old. So it's kind of old. So it's not like I could now start another Amazon site and say like, oh, hey, I mean, maybe I could, but I don't know. I just never. So I feel like that's what would be really good if you talk to somebody and talk to them about all those things, like not just about writing the book, because if you love food, or if you're in the food world, or if you have a restaurant, I'm sure you have an idea of what you want to do. And I spent so much time like making sure flavor profiles in the book were that I had cinnamon 3 times, and I had rhubarb 2 times, and I had chocolate with lemon here, and I had chocolate with like, and it was, I get lost in the minutia of things sometimes, which writing a book is really bad. So don't get lost in the minutia of it all. But yeah, that's what I would say. I would say like, if you could talk to somebody and just kind of create a map of everything so that you kind of have a timeline of what it looks like, and you know, just to make sure that you cover your bases. And you know what, in the end, you write a book and you write a book, and you should just be proud of it. So
yeah, no, definitely.
yeah.
But in regards to like kind of have a marketing plan, like before your book is even done, because that's when, you know, that's when sales are hottest, the initial launch, right? When all the hype happens. Not to say that you can't still promote your book, you know, months later. It's just, you lose a little bit of the momentum, right?
Right. And if I could say something, and this actually works in business, Fina, who I love, taught me this in business, and there's something called a 3-1-90. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's like, what's that saying where they say, a dream without a plan is just a dream, or something. Like, I mean, you can wish for something, but if you don't plan for it, then it's never going to happen. So like a 3-1-90 is like, you say wherever I am right now. So let's say today I wake up and I'm like, I'm going to write a cookbook. So in 3 years, what's my life as a cookbook author going to look like? So in 3 years, I will have written 2 books, and I will have sold 5,000 copies of my first book and 2,000 copies of my second book. And then, so if that's what's going to happen in 3 years, in order to get to that, what's going to happen in 1 year? So then you work back to 1 year, and you're like, okay, so what's my life going to look like in 1 year? And then if that's going to look like in 1 year, what's my life going to look like in 90 days? So that you can break it down. And she taught me that, which was like probably the best advice I could have, because it's, even if you're blogging and you're not writing a book and you want to say, you know, I need to monetize my site, then she would say to me like, well, how much money do you want to be making in 3 years? And you know, she said some crazy amount. I'm like, I can't make that. And she said, well, if you don't think you can, then you won't do it. And I'm like, you're right. So kind of that whole, and that's, I guess, planning, right? To plan. So if you say like, if I'm going to write a book and I want it to be published, whether I can get a publisher or not, at what point am I going to say, I'm going to try? And then in 6 months, if I have no publishers, I'm going to do it on my own. Like you've got to have, I mean, you could just keep spinning your wheels and spinning your wheels, but if you don't have a plan, then it may never get finished, right? So.
Perfect. So does anyone in the group have any questions for Suzie? Well, no, we got a quite bunch today.
Yeah, I can ask a question. Like, if we can skip a mentor, that's my first question. Can we skip a mentor? Do we need a mentor?
Oh. No, actually, I'm going to tell you something. So I think you really, because I've talked to some, my kids are like in their late 20s, early 30s. And I talked to like a lot of their friends about stuff, and like, it really depends on your personality. I really, I struggled a lot with sort of self-confidence, and am I doing the right thing? And will people like this? And if you have a strong personality and you say, you know what, this is what I'm doing, and I don't really care because this is what I'm doing, then you don't need a mentor to kind of guide you through that process. But I would say that if at any point during the process you get stuck on something, then I think you have to kind of have a little bit of foresight to say, if I've spent 2 months doing this one thing and nothing's happening, then maybe I need to find somebody in that thing, not as a mentor, but just like for, you know, somebody to kind of knock some stuff over with. So.
Yeah, or maybe just like friends that it's in the same business and can help, you know.
Yes, but I have to
a little, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, but I'm going to caution you about friends, because it depends on like, what kind of friends they are. Because like I have some friends. I remember when I was writing the book, I had written the book and I didn't find a publisher, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, maybe you just don't really want to write the book. And I was like, no. Like, so, I mean, if I was that person that was like, oh, like maybe I shouldn't write this book. So you have to kind of be careful who you talk to. And like, so friends are good, but you have to make sure they're friends that are like, not that she's lovely, but that they have your best interest in mind and they know who you are from a personality point of view so that they can guide you sort of the right way, if that makes sense. So
and be supportive.
Right.
The whole concept, yeah. And I have another question. How much money you have to invest up front? How much money you have to, have it just like
a lot?
Like just in approximately in general, how much?
So I'm going to tell you guys something, and this is what I've learned, because while I was writing the cookbook and while I was going through the process of doing the self-publishing, this is where like, because I was always about, you're a business person first, right? So you're like, obviously I'm not going to lose money, but obviously this is a lot of work. And like, if I had to put in like an hourly wage, oh my God, I would have lost money a long time ago on all this whole thing. So I was kind of asking people who had gotten publishing deals, like sort of give me an idea of how much money you've made, so that I can kind of like, if let's say I want to write another book and let's say my next book, I get a publishing deal. I don't know. Now I've learned everything about self-publishing. If it's not worth it, because now that I've made all my money back, my book is $32. Every time I sell a book, I make $32. But like, if you have a publisher, from what I understand, on a typical book, you make about $3 a book. So it's really not that much, but two things. First of all, you got an advance. So you got an advance that kind of helped you pay for all the upfront costs. And secondly, like I sold 3,000 books, but if I had a publisher, would I have sold 50,000 books? So, and would that in the end, would I have made more money even though it was $3 a book? So so when I asked those questions to people, it was really funny because I would say to people like, oh, like you hit, what's it called when you get the a bestseller, right? Like, oh, you're a bestseller in 2 weeks and I'm a bestseller. So I would ask people like, what does that mean? Like, how many books is that? And most people that I asked, they would say like, oh, Suzie, I don't know. And I'd always go back and I'd be like, what do you mean you don't know? Didn't you ask? And then finally somebody was honest with me and they said to me, listen, Suzie, I'd really love to tell you. And I don't know if it's just a verbal thing. I don't know if it's in a contract. I don't think they're really supposed to talk about it. Like if you sign a contract with a publisher, which in their defense makes sense because then you would kind of know, right? You would kind of know, like as a self-publisher, you kind of know how much money these people are all making and whether it's worth it or not. So I understand that it's kind of their business and that's kind of what they want to do. So I'm really not 100% sure. Like I don't know in the end what it looks like. I know I spoke to Greta, do you know Greta Podlatsky?
I even have her book. Yeah.
And she's a machine. Like if I could tell you, she is a machine. I spoke to her very briefly at a conference, and so she had what was the book that she did with her sister? The very, very first book, Looney Spoons.
Yeah.
And literally the whole story was that she had to sell her wedding dress to get money for an advance to create this book. And this was back in the day where there were no photographers, there were little cartoon pictures, and it like still selling to this day. And then her and her sister did a few other books and they moved on. Now she has her own books. And I talked to her and I said, would you ever start a company where because I would totally pay to have somebody like her mentor me because she's a self-publisher and she's made, from my understanding, millions of dollars selling her books. So
did she self-publish also?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah. She's only ever self-published. And her joke to me was, she said something like, she was talking to a group of us and she said that somebody from Random House said to her, well, we could publish your next book. And she said, okay, think about the person that you signed and think about the biggest advance you've ever given that person. You could multiply that by 5 and I'm still going to say no. And I'm like, oh wow. That's amazing that you can say that. But she's got like chutzpah. Like she's just got that, like she's so driven. And she was a speaker at this event and she was like, I got to go. I'm flying to Ottawa to talk to the people at Costco because they have to sell my book. Like she literally will not take no for an answer. So somebody like that is amazing. I don't know what she's like in terms of mentoring because I don't think she's just so busy. But I mean, I think something like that is like, I don't know, like in the end, like for me personally, and I will tell you anything you want to know. My upfront costs were about $70,000 at the beginning. Yeah. So that was like the printing, right? Because you have to do an advance for printing, right? Because you've got to print the books. And that's the other thing too, is like people like, you're paying for all these things, but the most expensive thing is the book, the actual book. And so you have to pay for all your printing costs and like, where is it going to be printed? And now like with supply chain things, I don't know if that's different. I don't know if paper costs more money. I don't know. Like, so I don't know what it would look like now versus 3 years ago when I started doing this, but all those things that like, if you have a publisher, you wouldn't even think about, right? So, and it is kind of nice because I mean, it was hard, but it was nice because now I understand the process. I even like people said, like do print on demand. So like, you know, print on demand is a really expensive thing. Like you can print it anywhere in the world, but the problem is it's going to cost a lot of money. You're going to make like not that much money, you know, on your own book. So you kind of have to figure out like, you know, if I would have ordered 10,000 copies, it would have cost me a lot less. But could I have sold 10,000 copies? I don't know. Like that's a lot of books, right? So I don't know.
Oh, interesting. No, thank you very much. We really appreciate your honesty there. Again, not knowing anything about the business, I was thinking like, you know, 10, you know, which I was totally wrong, right? Totally far off. So at least now we can set realistic expectations for anyone who's interested, right? Like, yeah, you're going to need a lot more than $10,000. Like what I was thinking.
Right. And maybe you have people that will like do things for you. Maybe you have a friend who's going to be your editor and she's really good at that. I mean, I don't know, like maybe somebody's done it on the side. So it really depends. I mean, if your budget doesn't allow for that, then I'm sure there's a lot of ways to cut corners. And trust me, I went to another designer before I used this designer who I was really happy with. And the other designer was 7 times as much as the designer I used. Like, not double, 7 times. And I was like, oh man. Like, so yeah. So there's a lot out there and there's, you know, so there's just a lot of options. And you know what? If you get a publishing deal, great. And if you don't, it is what it is. And if you want to just write your own cookbook and, you know, there's ways, even like I've published cookbooks for my kids' school when they were younger. And, you know, there's a lot of things that if you just want a documentation of your family stuff, there's ways to do it. You can do it. You can even print it at Costco, I think. So, you know, it's nice to have that kind of legacy and say, this is what I did. Right. So. Yeah,
well, that's fantastic. No, definitely a beautiful legacy it is. Like, yeah, if anyone, I highly recommend picking up the copy. That's like, it's gorgeous, and the recipes, they're timeless, right? So something you can use over and over again. You've got some, you know, great classics in here, and they're all just really approachable. So yeah, just definitely one of those. It's kind of like the Joy of Cooking Bible, but you know, baked and Canadian.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that like there's in the book there it's baking, but a lot of people thought it was just sweets because baking you think they're cookies, but there's a whole chapter on breads, there's a whole chapter on like savory things and breakfast foods and stuff. So that was the other thing that I think a lot of people weren't sure of, but yeah. Well,
Perfect. Yeah. So as we're just wrapping things up, you know, one last question. If you were to do it again, like what is the one key takeaway that you've learned from all the things that you've learned in the process? What's the one major key takeaway?
Oh, that I'm smarter than I thought.
That's a great takeaway.
You know, like, you know, well, it's funny because I feel like with social media, it's a little bit easier too, because it's like free marketing. So, I mean, if you can kind of wrap your head around social media, but I feel like it's kind of, you know, you don't do it for the glory, but you know, like I have a husband who has a company, and every time I'd go somewhere with him, they'd be like, oh, are you Paul's wife? And my husband came home like it was about 6 months ago, and he's like, you're not going to believe it. He goes, I went to the lawyer's office and the secretary ran up to me and she said, Paul, I just figured something out. Is Just Crumbs your wife? And I'm like, oh my God, I did it. I'm more popular than you.
I'm famous.
But yeah, you know what? I mean, it's a nice thing in this world that we live in. And I don't know how many people that are watching, if they are like bloggers or if they're like recipe developers or what the sort of the landscape of people's jobs are. But working as like I do brand work and I'm a recipe developer, it's a hard job because, you know, it's not like you're going to a factory and making widgets. And if you make 10 widgets in an hour, you're like, you're a good widget maker. Like people aren't behind you patting on your back and going, you're so good at this. So you're alone a lot. You don't get the accolades. So like, you know, you write a book and you're like, oh, like people message me and say like, oh, I tried this recipe and it was so good. And it's like, oh my God, thank you so much. So it's kind of, that's the takeaway. I think it's just like sort of a thing that said like, oh my God, I can do it. So it was a good self-esteem boost. Yeah.
Perfect. So now you're ready to take on the world.
Maybe. Yes.
So say, yes, you are.
Yes, I am. I know. I'm like, I'm gonna get chickens. That's what I'm gonna do. This year I started making my own honey because I live on a farm. And I'm like, next year if I wrote a book, I can for sure raise chickens. I'm gonna do that.
Oh my goodness. I've been watching your stories. You have quite the wildlife kingdom in your backyard.
I feel like Dr. Dolittle every day. I'm like, I feel like I'm rescuing animals all the time from the jaws of my dog. I know.
Perfect. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but yeah, greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, Suzie, for taking time out of your schedule to do this. You were absolutely lovely, and we appreciate your honesty and all the advice that you shared with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Take care. Have a great afternoon. Bye.
Bye.